Is suffering part of God's plan and will for my life? Fravion, this is a great question that you asked in our last episode of Ask a Pastor. Guys, comment your questions right now below that you want to ask the lead pastor of a church, and also subscribe so you don't miss my response video. That would be horrible if you missed it. So Fravion, this is a great question that is really common. Is suffering part of God's will for my life? And there's a really simple part of the answer and then a more complex one. But I just want to encourage you in saying answering this question is one that a lot of Christians don't understand. And this can take you from having a really basic or intermediate understanding of God and stepping into advanced and really being someone who is powerful for God's kingdom. So the answer is this: is God's will for my life, is it suffering? The answer is no. We could look at what God's perfect plan, the perfect will, the perfect dream for our life that he had as we look at heaven, right? Heaven has no sorrow, has no pain, has no suffering. We look at the Garden of Eden. There's no suffering, there was no pain there before humans chose to sin, right? Sin entered the world. And so this shows us this. One, God's plan, his will for our lives is not to suffer. When people, a big misconception is someone will break their leg and say, I broke my leg, but this is God's plan. God wanted this to happen because he has a reason. That's actually not true. What is true is that God can take broken things and hardships and sin and pain and suffering, and he's so good that he could use those things for good. That doesn't mean he wanted that person to suffer. So here's what I'm saying. Most people, when they look at the world, they think that God is the only force that does things, the only force that makes decisions, but that couldn't be further from the truth. See, God's sovereign, meaning he can do anything. He's all powerful, but there's also evil, right? There's also Satan, there's also demons, there's also all these other things, and there's also sin within us. We also make decisions as well that impact the world around us. So the reality is this, that there's enemies, there's demons, there's sin, there's us, there's all these things that can make mistakes, that can cause suffering. And so sometimes in the midst of suffering, God wants us to stand firm on our faith, to not turn our backs, to not back down, to not deny our relationship with Jesus and break it. But because there's suffering in this world, the reality is that God didn't want all that suffering to happen to you, but he's the one who could take all of it and he could turn it for good because he's that great. Guys, I love you. Have a great rest of your day.